The advice most people have been given about a heart-healthy diet is technically correct and practically useless. Eat less salt, avoid fat, eat more vegetables. These aren't wrong, they're just incomplete in ways that matter. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for women in the United States. The research on diet and heart health has been accumulating for decades, and what it now shows is more nuanced and more actionable than the low-fat guidance that dominated the 1980s and 90s. Dietary patterns over individual foods. The strongest evidence in nutritional cardiology doesn't come from individual foods. It comes from dietary patterns studied over time across large populations. The Mediterranean diet has more research behind it than any other eating pattern studied for cardiovascular outcomes. It's not a strict protocol, it's a framework. Abundant vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds, olive oil as the primary fat, moderate fish, limited red meat, and moderate wine if alcohol is consumed at all. The PREDIMED trial, one of the largest randomized nutrition studies ever conducted, found that a Mediterranean-style diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil or mixed nuts reduced major cardiovascular events, heart attack, stroke, cardiovascular death, by roughly 30% compared to a low-fat diet. Not compared to a poor diet, compared to a low-fat diet that was considered healthy at the time. The takeaway isn't to eat a specific cuisine, it's that the overall pattern of eating matters more than any single food decision, and the pattern with the most evidence behind it looks a lot like what people in Crete were eating in the 1960s. The fat conversation. Fat is where the nutritional science becomes most nuanced, and where the most consequential mistakes were made. The low-fat dietary era produced a generation of products with fat removed and sugar added in its place. The cardiovascular data from that period is not favorable. The original hypothesis that dietary fat drives heart disease turned out to be significantly more complicated than it first appeared. What the research is unambiguous on: trans fats, found in partially hydrogenated oils used in processed foods, are harmful to cardiovascular health. The FDA effectively banned them in the United States in 2018. Their removal from the food supply is one of the clearest public health wins of the past 2 decades. Saturated fat is more complicated. It raises LDL cholesterol, which is associated with cardiovascular risk. It also raises HDL. Recent meta-analyses have found that replacing saturated fat with refined carbohydrates doesn't improve cardiovascular outcomes. Replacing it with unsaturated fats does. The quality of the substitution is what matters. Olive oil, particularly extra virgin, has the most consistent evidence of any single fat for cardiovascular benefit. It's rich in oleocanthal, a compound with anti-inflammatory properties comparable to low-dose ibuprofen. Its monounsaturated fat profile has tracked with lower cardiovascular risk across studies consistently enough that it's become a cornerstone of Mediterranean diet research. A tablespoon or 2 daily is the amount used in most trials. Soluble fiber. Soluble fiber is probably the most underutilized tool in a heart-healthy diet, and one of the most evidence-backed. It works mechanically. Soluble fiber dissolves in water to form a gel in the digestive tract. That gel binds to LDL cholesterol and bile acids, and carries them out of the body before they can be reabsorbed. Less circulating LDL means less material available to build arterial plaque. Oats, beans, lentils, flaxseed, apples, and citrus are all high in soluble fiber. The American Heart Association recommends 25 to 30 grams of total fiber daily. Most adults in the US consume about 15. Studies consistently show that closing that gap through diet, particularly with soluble sources, can reduce LDL by 5 to 10%. No prescription required. Sodium, the bigger picture. Salt is not the whole story. The recommendation to reduce sodium is well-founded for people who are salt-sensitive, a category that includes a significant proportion of people with hypertension, particularly older adults and Black Americans, who show higher rates of salt sensitivity. The evidence for the general population is more modest than the emphasis sodium receives. What has clearer evidence across populations is the potassium-sodium ratio. Potassium helps the kidneys excrete sodium and relaxes blood vessel walls directly. A diet high in sodium and low in potassium is the pattern most consistently associated with elevated blood pressure and cardiovascular risk. The answer for most people is less about aggressively restricting salt and more about increasing potassium-rich foods. Dark leafy greens, beans, sweet potatoes, avocado, bananas. Getting potassium up is often more achievable and more impactful than obsessively tracking sodium intake. Ultra-processed food. The clearest dietary signal in recent cardiovascular research isn't about fat or sodium or any single nutrient. It's about ultra-processed food. The NOVA classification system groups food by level of industrial processing rather than nutrient content. Ultra-processed foods are those assembled from industrial ingredients, emulsifiers, modified starches, artificial flavors, colorings, preservatives, that don't exist in a home kitchen. Studies tracking large populations consistently find that higher ultra-processed food consumption is associated with significantly elevated cardiovascular mortality, independent of macronutrient profiles. The problem isn't always identifiable from the label. It's the food matrix, the way industrial processing changes the speed of digestion, how the gut microbiome responds, and how hunger and satiety signals function over time. People who eat more ultra-processed food eat more total calories without reporting proportionally higher hunger, and the cardiovascular effects compound over years. Reading ingredient lists helps. The more reliable signal is whether a food was cooked or assembled in a factory. A heart-healthy diet doesn't require a protocol. It requires a pattern: whole foods, quality fats, adequate fiber, enough potassium, and significantly less of whatever came out of an industrial facility. The research is clearer on that framework than on almost anything else in nutrition. This video is for informational purposes only, and is not a substitute for professional medical advice.